Jeff, the floor is yours.
Oh, great. Well, I want to thank everybody for signing up. And I also want to thank you, Mark, for inviting me to speak in this last New York City Urban Sketchers Winter Talk series. And the title of my talk today is Medicine and Art, not necessarily in that order. And I just want to tell you how this little webinar came about. Back in November, at an Urban Sketchers meeting in the cafeteria of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, our fearless leader, Mark Leibowitz, made the announcement that Jeff will be giving a winter talk on medicine and art. And this was the first I heard about it. But afterwards, I thanked him for the assignment and started to put this talk together. So I think with that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, is my screen being shared?
Absolutely, you're good.
Okay, great.
Everybody sees it, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. So truthfully, it really wasn't easy for me to put together this talk. I really had to go back into the attics of my life and into my old files and sketchbooks while filling in some blanks and doing some new sketches and illustrations that you'll see today. And in the next 45 minutes, I'm going to go over my quest to integrate art into medicine and medicine into art and share some thoughts about people that inspired me and helped me in my journey. So let's then make sure this works. All right. So I'd like to start by quoting Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, whose seminal writings were source material for physicians for hundreds of years. And one of the things that he said that has attained fame is his quote, ars longa, vita brevis, which is translated literally from Latin as art is long, life is short, the meaning of which has long been a subject of debate. I believe the meaning lies in the declaration that skillfulness, whether in art or medicine, takes time. And in our brief life on earth, we race against time, whether in art or medicine, to become proficient. And this ink rendering has influences from the great illustrator Saul Steinberg, and also has some influences by our fellow urban sketcher, Sean Cooper, from New York City Urban Sketchers, who gave a workshop on how to put text into sketches. So my mom was a Cooper Union fine arts grad in the 1940s.
Wow.
And afterwards, she worked in advertising and window design for department stores in New York City. And around my home in Jersey City were her art supplies, boxes, hidden in the bottom of drawers with dip pens, nibs, pastels, rulers, brushes, and oil paints. So when other boys were playing Little League, I was busy using my mom's art supplies, making paintings and drawings, and I learned the language of design and composition. This is one of my first oil paintings, my pet turtle, done when I was 6. My drawings were very important to me, and I got in the habit of making art using whatever media I found in the drawer. I would have likely followed a road into art were it not for this man, my Uncle Zelig. He was an old-style doctor. He was in solo practice and lived upstairs from his home, and downstairs was his office. It was full of gadgets, bottles, needles, mysterious machines that plugged into the wall and had blinking lights. This was a place I saw through my eyes with reverence and wonder. When I was very young, he started coming to my home on Sunday mornings to leave me his medical magazines and old textbooks. Pictures of people's insides scared the heck out of me, but left me awe-inspired. My uncle gave me my first job, cleaning his office. In the days before rubber gloves became routine, I cringe at the memories of what I found in his trash and under his examining table. But I had the downtime to be alone, looking in awe at his things. He let me use his huge old microscope. I would stand on a chair in his office for hours in the empty space, preparing slides and looking through this awesome lens on his antique scope. Okay, so sometimes I brought water from my fish tank in a jar and searched for paramecia and amoebas. My uncle taught me how to make a peripheral smear with my own blood and teaching me different cells and identify them with big words like erythrocytes and leukocytes. As you can observe from this inking, one of my major influences in my inkings were Robert Crumb from Zap Comics fame. And on the wall of his waiting room were a series of prints by the famous medical illustrator Frank Netter, who was both a medical doctor and an artist. And this series that Netter executed probably in the 1940s was a series entitled Scenes from the Life of a Doctor. And there were at least six, 7, 8 of them. I would stare at them for hours, noting every detail. This scene that we're showing here shows a chaotic big city emergency room. And in the foreground, you can see a policeman taking notes on a bloodied victim of an accident or assault, while a doctor in the background takes a history on a bedbound patient. You can see him here. This is the doctor here. And 2 nurses you can see working. And the chaplain way in the back is looking down at an elderly man who really doesn't look well. See this gentleman back here. And this scene shows a group of medical students cramming for an examination on bones in the wee hours of the morning in a garret New York City apartment. A skull is on the table, and a box of bones is on the floor with a rib bone and femur sticking out. You can see the box of bones here, the bones sticking out. And an open textbook on the foreground surrounded by cigarette butts. The clock on the bureau gives the time at 3:20, probably a.m., and the student makeup, as you can see, is much different from today's class because they're all male and everybody's smoking cigarettes and pipes. I think today's makeup, we have over 50% females. So many years later, I wanted to see these paintings again. I found the originals had been donated to NYU Medical School, Netta's alma mater, and were hanging in the dean's office. And this was only a few blocks from my downtown office. So I made an appointment to go view them. And here I am with the same awe and wonder so many years later. When I was 13, my family, including my uncle and his family, took a train ride across the country to see the national parks. This is my reconstructed memory in watercolor of a Union Pacific train passing through the desert. He always did something I perceived as magical. He would look at a random stranger in the street and make observations on what he perceived as going on inside their bodies. And on this trip, we were sitting at a train station in the middle of somewhere, Colorado, Montana. I don't remember exactly where, but there was a rugged old cowboy snoring in a chair, sleeping and snoring, just passing the time. My uncle tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You see that cowboy? He's got tuberculosis." So as an impressionable 13-year-old, I was intrigued and amazed that he could see inside a person's body, and this left me with a thirst to know more about what's inside people. Years later, when I got to medical school, I realized the truth, that my uncle was bamboozling me, as no physician, no matter how skilled, can make a diagnosis of tuberculosis from across the room. So here's another patient. Here's another picture of my uncle Zelig, the man who introduced me to medical science. In his late years, he began to get forgetful. He got lost on his way to hospital rounds and got into car accidents. One day, the police picked him up after an accident miles away from his home. The back of his car was filled with junk and garbage that he had picked up from here and there. And when I spoke to him, he no longer remembered my name. This insightful pen and ink drawing will reveal his diagnosis. The drawing was done by my friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Podwall, who, aside from being a practicing dermatologist and adjunct associate professor at NYU Medical School, He's a prolific and talented artist whose work has graced many books and posters, and in the New York Times, where this illustration was first published. My Uncle Zelig had Alzheimer's, a degenerative disease that erodes the brain, for which medicine still has no cure. My uncle lost his ability to speak and walk and spent his last days in a nursing home. This drawing I did 40 years ago in medical school. I took a day off from med school to go visit him, and I leaned over and put my hand on his shoulder. And said into his ear, "Thank you, Uncle Zelig." His eyes opened wide and he looked at me, and for a split second, the brain cells fired together and his eyes got a look of astonishment as he recognized me. And then silently he drifted back into his dementia. I knew at that moment that I'd be directing my medical career into geriatric medicine, and that's why I moved from Jersey to Manhattan to train and eventually became clinical faculty at the Mount Sinai Medical Center in Manhattan. And I continued to sketch through medical school. This is a scene in the dissecting room, the first place a medical student goes. Your baptism by fire, so to speak, as a deceased person yields the secrets of their bones, muscles, nerves, and organs. I sketched many of my professors who very often didn't like my work. Perhaps it was because it was a bit too honest. Here's one of my neurology professors demonstrating an examination of the oculomotor nerves. My influences in this inking were Hogarth and Rowlandson, illustrators from the 18th century. It was in medical school that I discovered the Art Students League. At the time, this was one of the very few places in town where you could just go and buy a ticket and do life drawing in the evening. And I was there nearly every Friday night through medical school. And during the day, I would sketch what I saw in the wards. This sketch of a newborn fresh from the womb was done on my rotation through OBGYN. And on Friday night, I drove back into the city and did more life drawing at the Art Students League. And back in the hospital wards, I continued to make sketches. This is Dennis Quinlan, one of the most formidable and respected teachers in internal medicine. I did this sketch for our graduation yearbook, class of 1981, and tried to convey the fear and awe he inspired in all of us as we rotated through medicine. So I moved into Manhattan to study geriatrics at Mount Sinai in 1985 and put my whole art studio, I just packed up and put it into storage. And then decided I wanted to learn photography. So I took an evening course at the International Center for Photography, or ICP, which at the time was only a few blocks from my hospital on the Upper East Side on Fifth Avenue. And I built a darkroom in the bathroom of my third floor walk-up. And this is me examining a patient in my geriatric clinic at Morningside Heights. I continued my fascination with medical science while having a new love affair with photographing the grittier side of Manhattan in the 1980s. I'd get up before dawn and bicycle around the city, photographing the parts of Manhattan that have since disappeared. This was taken in the meatpacking district at a time when they really packed meat, and you could see chunks of carcasses hanging on hooks. And this is the area along the East River under the Manhattan Bridge, where stolen cars were taken and chopped up and then rolled into the river to just rust away. I photographed down here many times, and each time there was a different array of vehicles, just a continuing change of vehicles as they were chopped up with parts removed and then thrown into the river. And during the day, I'd return to the medical wards where my goal was to build a visual encyclopedia of aging, which turned out to be a quixotic project that was so vast it would never be finished. And this is one of my nursing home patients, a lady with advanced dementia who always seemed in deep thought. In my quest to build a visual encyclopedia of aging, I went into the community and traveled to find suitable images. I took this lovely intergenerational family shot in the alleyways of the old section of Lisbon, Portugal. Whenever I could, I'd send prints to my subjects. So I developed a body of work that focuses largely on intergenerational connections and spirituality. And this was taken by the Western Wall in Jerusalem, where a great-grandson is helping his great-grandfather who had a stroke put on his tefillin for morning prayer. And this older man was photographed in a tattoo show in the Roseland Ballroom in Manhattan. His half-naked body was decorated with memories and souvenirs of all the places he stopped while working on the sea. And this is a portrait of a Tuskegee Airman, J.T. Freeman, who was one of the soldiers who broke the color barrier by flying combat missions in World War II. As you can see, he's proudly wearing his Congressional Gold Medal around his neck. During this time, I managed to publish over 100 covers of various journals. And my editor, Rachel Pruchnow, is in the audience, and she was the editor-in-chief of this journal at the time. And it included, let's see, did over 100 covers on this thing, including this shot that appeared on the cover of the Journal of the American Geriatric Society that featured my colleague, Dr. Stephanie Lay, in full PPE, personal protective equipment, who was examining a patient at the nursing home where I currently see patients. And there's a substantial body of photography that I wouldn't dare show in this forum, which is my medical photos of wounds. I've used these images to illustrate my teaching slides, articles, and books. This cover shot features Mike Labrizzi, who was one of the best wound care nurses I've ever had the privilege of working with. Another nurse kindly offered her leg and foot so I could take this shot of the examining table. Take this shot on the examining table, and this was for the cover of my book. Really couldn't put any wound photos on the cover. And here's a pic from the same photo shoot with Pete and some of the other wound care clinic staff. Unfortunately, not pictured as our chief, Dr. Michael Chiroyo, who hired me to work here. It was a great group to work with, and our clinic was in business for 10 years. We worked at 3 different hospitals downtown. Cabrini, if any of you remember Cabrini, St. Vincent's Hospital, we worked at St. Vincent's, and Beth Israel Medical Center, that's still down there and now affiliated with Mount Sinai. And I should say that while I worked downtown, these areas were right either in the village or adjacent to the village. And I had the opportunity and the privilege to take care of a lot of aging artists, a lot of the old artists that had lived there for many years, and some of which got very successful and some of which were still living in poverty. Those of you who've been in the New York art scene recognize this place. And
Yes.
Yeah. So with my art supplies locked away in storage, I had essentially given up sketching. One day in 2014, I heard that Pearl Paint was closing and that everything was on sale. So I went downtown and picked up sable brushes and a watercolor set at a really good price. And which watercolor at the time was a medium I had not yet learned to use. I started to sketch around Manhattan, testing out various papers and sketchbooks and combining watercolor with ink work. This is from my Washington Heights sketchbook, where I lived for short. Well, actually, we lived there 6 months while with my wife, while my apartment was getting some work done. Around this time, I started an art website and a blog where I posted my paintings and sketches. One day, I checked my inbox, and there was an email from this gentleman who you see in the foreground, Mark Leibowitz, who invited me to join New York City Urban Sketchers. So this sketch is from one of our meetups in Manhattan, and that's basically how I ended up here today chatting with you. So before we end, I want to switch gears and share another physician artist who has served as my inspiration. His name is Andreas Vesalius, and he lived in 16th century Europe. I learned about Vesalius as a teenager, and his spirit has been with me throughout my life and career. And this illustration is from the inside, like the first page of his book. He wrote and supervised the illustrations for this book, which was one of the most famous in medical history. The title of this book was De Humani Corporis Fabrica, which is Latin for the fabric of the human body, was published in 1543. And this was the first accurate and comprehensive book on anatomy. Here is the book with beautifully rendered woodcuts of bodies in various stages of dissection. Vesalius used corpses stolen from fresh graves or executed criminals to perform his dissections. He'd dissect the body, then clean up the bones and assemble them into a skeleton used for anatomic study. His illustrations of dissections of the human body are unrivaled in their beauty and featured partially dissected people in various poses that presented them as living beings. Here's an example of his Muscle Men series, where the backgrounds, you see these backgrounds. If you put together all of these muscle men, I believe there's about 6 of them. Arlene can help me with that. It puts together a panorama of the area surrounding Padua, which is right outside Venice, where he was a professor. In the Anatomical Museum at the University of Basel in Switzerland, there's one remaining skeleton that was assembled by Vesalius himself with his own hands. As per his usual routine, he dissected the body of an executed criminal, then cleaned the bones and assembled them with metal wires. After graduating from medical school, I went there to check it out. Here I am in Switzerland at the University of Basel with Vesalius' skeleton. And what's interesting is if you look really close, and you don't even really have to look that close, you can see the severed cervical vertebrae where this poor man was beheaded in the town square. You can see that?
Yeah.
So this is my happy place. I had the wonderful opportunity to study Vesalius's work in the rare book room at the New York Academy of Medicine with distinguished scholar and cardiologist Mike Nevins, who happens to be in the audience tonight. Thank you, Mark, for signing up. We're in 2014, we did a presentation at the Academy for the 500th anniversary of Vesalius's birth. And for those who are interested, I'll be giving another presentation on Vesalius in April 24th. The New York Academy of Medicine has a history night, medical history night. And if anybody's interested, just email me and I'll provide info as how you can sign up. And Arlene Shaner, who's also in the audience tonight, thank you, Arlene, for signing up, is the librarian at the Rare Book Room. And she's helped me over many years on various history research projects. And so I continue to try in my own small way to stand in the shadows of people like Netter, Vesalius, and Podwall by illustrating my medical publications with drawings and paintings. And this one in gouache represents a cross-section anatomy of the ear that I published recently on an article about damage to the back of the ear by wearing masks that appeared in one of the journals, Advances in Skin and Wound Care. And this digital representation of a skin ulcer. As you may know, wound care forms the basis of my current medical practice. And this cross-section illustrates a deep wound, a pressure injury, also known as a bed sore, that goes down to the femoral bone. And so I continue to sketch. During the depths of the COVID pandemic, visitors were barred from coming to see their friends and relatives who resided in the nursing home where I work. And to remediate this awful situation that caused grief among the families and isolation among the patients, the social work and recreation departments arranged window visits where visitors can communicate through the window with cell phones. So I took my sketchbook in because I knew this was a unique situation that was eventually going to disappear. And I was able to sketch this. And this is a scene in the medical library. What we're doing is we've got a patient in the foreground and a visitor, friend or relative, I'm not sure who it was, behind the window on 106th Street. And they're communicating, looking at each other and communicating through cell phones. And in the depths of the pandemic lockdown, on the first day vaccinations were offered in the facility, which happened to be the same day the president got vaccinated, it was December 21st, 2020. They brought vaccinations into my nursing home. And I knew it would be a momentous occasion. So I took my sketchbook and recorded this scene of a nurse getting vaccinated. And in the back of the home, there's a little pond with turtles and fish. So then one day on my lunch break, I took my sketchbook out and I sketched this lady who was sitting in her wheelchair communing with nature. And you can see she's sitting with this little turtle sitting on a rock and these beautiful koi in the pond. So in closing, and I know we're really early, but I'm going to close here because I'm quoting another doctor who's inspired me. His name is William Carlos Williams, who was a practicing physician and a giant in the 20th century world of poetry. He wrote his poems on prescription pads between patients who came to his office in Rutherford, New Jersey. And late in life, as he looked back on his career, he said this: "When they ask me, as of late they frequently do, how I have for so many years continued an equal interest in medicine and the poem, I reply that they amount to, for me, to be nearly the same thing. So this is my final slide featuring me and my dog Winslow. He's in his subway bag during the depths of the New York City lockdown. And with that, I'm going to sign off with a thank you for the invitation from New York City Urban Sketchers. And at the bottom right, you have my contact information. And I think we might have time for a few questions.
We definitely do. Want to
Okay,
take on the slides first?
Stop my share.
Can you hear the resounding applause?
That was great. That was fabulous, Jeff. Really enjoyed it.
Excellent.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Well, in
Great
addition to all of
question.
the thanks, does anybody have a question?
I have a question. You
Sure.
ready?
Yeah.
So what do you think it is that makes it so that artists and medicine or science is so interrelated?
Well, I think it's history because, we think that today, what's in the book and what's on the computer is what the way it's always been. And that's not true because medicine, art, and religion have always been intertwined. And throughout the years, and I actually have I have dozens of slides with other artists. And I didn't think I'd end so early, or else I would throw some more in. But I've got a lot of other artists who were doctors and doctors who were artists. And, Mark Podwall is one of my, really one of my icons in my life, who I showed one of his pieces. But there's a lot more, we talked about Frank Netter. And there's a lot of artists who have become writers. Chekhov, for example, I've got some great slides. I visited Chekhov's grave in Moscow. I wanted to know how the hell did you do that? What you did in your life, because he died in his 40s and he accomplished so much before he died, practicing medicine and writing.
I have a question, Jeff.
Sure.
I'm so moved by the question. I'll gush later. The question is about the role of memory. And I was so struck by the spiritual power of memory, as in standing on the shoulders of giants through your personal memory, through retrieving in your imaginative memory scenes from the past. And could you just talk about the thread of memory and how it informs the movement forward of your gorgeous illustration of not just the literal and anatomical, but the psychological and spiritual, but the role of memory. And thank you for introducing me to your Uncle Zelig.
Well, I think it has to do with left brain and right brain, and somewhere buried in my blog, I actually talk about this. I believe it's the right brain that has the conceptual, and the left brain that has the factual. And that's just a bare summary. I actually did a blog post on this. And when I started thinking about this was when I was sketching in the subway. And I don't do it anymore. Some hairy experiences. But for a couple of years, you've seen, those of you who've been following my urban sketching know that for a couple of years, I was sketching every day in the subway. And I noticed that when I'm sketching, time disappears. And time is not registered by the right brain, registered by the left brain. So, when you get completely ensconced in your right brain, there's a lot of things that just disappear. And what happens is the left and the right brain integrate and share things through this huge structure called the corpus callosum, which passes fibers from left to right, left and right, that integrate memory and aesthetics. I guess I could talk maybe a little bit more, but that's basically what I had. Just take a look somewhere, dig around in my blog at jmlevinemd.com, and you'll find that. You'll find some commentary on that. Any other questions?
I have an observation. One of the things that another integrating point between art and medicine is all of the medical illustrations that are done. You did touch on it with I'm not going to remember the man's name from.
Never.
No, the
Vesalius?
Yeah. But even today, it's a common practice. It's an art form.
Well, I was really attracted, and I have to tell you, I was really attracted to medical illustration. And in my college days, I said, "Oh, I'm going to be a medical illustrator." And I don't know. It seemed that the grades had already passed. There was. I wish I could show some more pictures. But before Netter, who did illustrations in the 40s, there were doctors that did medical illustration for centuries. Vesalius was one of the greatest, and he was in the 16th century. But 17th, 18th, 19th, and early 20th century, there were great medical illustrators. One of them, his name is Tom Jones. I don't know whether anybody's ever seen that. And, I was just so impressed. Beautiful pen and ink work, beautiful color work, beautiful watercolor work. And I thought really carefully about it. I think I actually interviewed at one or two medical illustration programs. And the bottom line was, I said, I could do art, but I won't be doing medicine, and I could do medicine and I could still be doing art. So, it was that thought that said, something, I'll bite the bullet and go to medical school.
Jeff, did you take courses as an undergrad in art? Did you do any formal studies?
No.
While you were an undergrad?
I did take a couple of Art 101 in college. I have to tell you, it bored me to tears.
Were those studio classes or art history?
Well, both. well, the art history I loved, but the studio classes, I don't know, maybe I didn't have the right teacher, because your teacher in art is really, really, really important. So maybe I didn't have the right teacher, but I just found, the process of sitting in art school to be boring. So I was much more excited by science and, by science and chemistry and biochemistry. It just, filled me up.
Jeff, I'm thinking about
Thank you.
the quote that you closed with, the William Carlos Williams, and I can only imagine what it might be like to be a doctor, but it seems to me that we all have experienced at some point or another the idea that doctors do things that almost seem miraculous, and deal with issues that are important to us, but go a little outside of our own area of expertise. The thing that I'm more familiar with is on the art side, where you start with a blank, white sheet of paper, and nobody in this group is all that impressed when you get a decent drawing on that sheet of paper. But for somebody that doesn't draw, there's almost a miraculous aspect to the fact that we can create something. And I was just sort of thinking if, maybe that was the connection that, as artists and as doctors, we all perform things that have a miraculous quality to it.
Well, there's no miracles to medicine. Okay. I mean, it may seem like a miracle, but, I just, and it's a great fantasy, but from where I sit, sometimes things may seem miraculous. I don't want to, minimize what doctors can do, what some doctors can do. But yeah, I mean, the thing about, helping people is something that medicine offers that you don't have in art. I mean, you could do things that really, you learn about people's lives, you learn about what's inside their life, you find out things that nobody will ever know about people. And, their relationships, their families, and you just get a window on humanity that, you just don't get otherwise. If you read Chekhov, you should read Chekhov. You read Chekhov, okay? He has such a wonderful view of people. And, if you read Chekhov, you'll see how doctors see people, because he really saw inside people. And as I read Chekhov, I see the medicine right in there.
Hey, Jeff, I was just going to ask, do you think your artistic self has made you a better doctor?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because, it opens me up to being able to, it just opens up different parts of my brain that helps me to perceive people differently, without a doubt. And I think it affects the way I think in medicine.
I have a comment for Dr. Levine. This is Dr. Stone. I'm a
Art Stone, my buddy Art Stone, Dr. Stone, Dr. Stone,
colleague and buddy for many years. And I sat on a board with him over a number of years. And
that's right.
It was very interesting when drawings were brought out that were not truly accurate.
Don't talk about that. Thank you, Mark, for bringing that up.
Okay. They weren't, but Jeff was kind enough to sit and look at me and make faces. Never really got into it.
I haven't. That fight is not over, by the way, Art.
I understand. And
Jeff, could I comment?
Sure.
This is Mike Nevins.
Hey, Mike.
It was a beautiful presentation, but the audience should be aware that we only saw a very small sample of Jeff's work, which is extraordinary in many respects. Concerning the relationship between art and medicine, I think you have to distinguish between fine art and other forms of art, because there's what's known as the art of medicine, which really has more to do with not the science of medicine, but the humanity of medicine. And there is a very intimate relationship between, quotes, art and medicine.
Jeff, have you found other people who are practicing medicine and on making art just like yourself in a contemporary way in your travels?
Yeah, there's a bunch of young people who have these amazing Instagram streams. I can't remember the names, but there's at least 2 or 3 people that I follow on Instagram who are, very, people right out of medical school. And yeah, there's a lot of people who do, besides Mark Podwall, for sure. But I wanted to talk about art and medicine once again. Those of you, and I know that in the sketch group, one of the wonderful benefits of my relationship with the Urban Sketchers is we meet a lot of people who've spent their lives in art, in either fine arts or illustration or advertising. And to be a really great artist, you need to devote 125% of your being to being successful. And that, everybody out there understands what I'm saying. To be a great doctor, to be a good doctor, you also have to devote 125% of your being to be a good doctor. So, how much can you fit in one lifetime? And in many respects, I kind of feel like I fell between 2 stools, if you know what that means, because, when I was maybe 20, 30 years ago, I started every job that I took, I negotiated a 4-day work week, which wasn't easy. And on my 5th day, I did art. So, that was quite a sacrifice because it closed off a lot of medical opportunities. Who the hell wants a doctor who can only work 4 days a week? I mean, a lot of people shut me out, but I knew I couldn't, I knew that I had to, set time apart for my own sanity as an artist. So, basically, 125 plus 125 equals something that most people can't attain.
Well, it's great that you didn't have to sacrifice either, and that you could do both in whatever compromised way, but you could do both. And that's incredibly wonderful.
It does seem that way. And thank you for the kind comment. Well, Mark, what do you think? You think it's time to close?
I think it kind of is. Jeff, thank you very much for all of the time and effort you put into this. That was a wonderful presentation.
Yeah.
Having read the chat comments, I know I'm speaking for a lot of people here when I say that.
Yeah.
That's it. Again, Jeff, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much.
Everyone
Thanks,
have a great
everybody.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.